Hi. Like Jen said, I'm here to talk to you about games. My topic is JavaScript as play. It's going to be a primer on getting started with video games, pretty much. My name's Rachel White. I'm Oho on Twitter, and yeah, let's get started. To preface, before we get into any codes or like what is a game, like why games, I want to talk about why games for me personally, because they've always been a really big part of my life. In the 80s, when I was 4 or so, this was my first game console. Does anybody know what this is? Because no one usually does. Okay, one person. What it is it's a VTech Socrates. It is a set-top console that used infrared light to interact with this keyboard and little mouse things, and it was all educational games. It was like math and architecture, and just, it was really fun, and I loved it, and it got me hooked. I think that, oh no, something's not working. Hold on one second. Everything works until you're up here, and then all of your images disappear. Okay, all right. Yay, all right. So, why games? Oh, now I have to do speaker view again and drag this over, and you can pretend that none of this ever happened. So, Socrates is great. This was the little sponsory guy, and he was like, let's learn and play together. And I was like, that's awesome. I want to learn and play together. So that's pretty much what I've been wanting to do since then. And then I get a little bit older. I went to school for design, and I thought that I was always going to be like a web designer, but it turns out I'm not very good at it. But luckily, I knew how to code. So I found this game, which is called VVVVVV, and it's by a developer called Terry Kavanaugh. And what he does is he just makes really challenging but simple in the basic principles of like how the game is controlled. And I was like, this is so cool. I really want to make this stuff, but I'm a design major. I don't know if I can like make a game, so I kind of pushed it into the back of my head. And then, fast forward to 2014, I moved back to New York. I started going to this event space called Baby Castles, which is a video game gallery and artist collective that I was a part of. And I found out about co-op, and I was like, this isn't a game. And then they were like, no, it totally is a game. And I was like, how can it be a game? Look at it. And it really made me start thinking about like how to change my viewpoint on what is and what isn't a game. I think it's very similar to something that a lot of people go with, which is like, are you or aren't you a developer, depending on how much code you touch. It's the same thing, but less funny. All right, so I want you to raise your hand if you're a JavaScript developer and keep it up. I can't really see you, but I trust you're doing it. And keep them up, and now keep it up if you play video games. Okay, and now keep it up if you've ever made a game. Okay, cool. So now everybody that had their hands just up, I want you to look around and see, like, it's a pretty good, let me block the lights out. That's a pretty good chunk of people that have made a game. But if you don't have your hands up and this is something that you're interested in, I really urge you, when this is over, to like, just try, because it's not that bad. So, to talk about video game development, we have to think about what is a game. You found a magical or mystical pizza. I personally would have picked cool, but it's okay. And what is a game? A game is something that entertains the user. It's something that delights the user. The user controls mostly what happens. A few exceptions would be narrative fiction games, which mostly just the user controls the flow of the story. Still a game. And there's usually something to learn or a goal to achieve, but not always. They mostly exist to entertain, educate, or they can just be art for art's sake. Now that we know what a game is, let's apply that to something that we already know, Like, what is an app? It's something that entertains. It is something that's supposed to delight the user. If it's not exciting and fun to look at, they're going to lose their interest. The user controls mostly what happens, unless you scroll jack them or have really, really intense, parallax, so don't do that. There's usually something to learn or a goal to achieve. You want to inform someone about a product or a service. And it exists to entertain, educate, or an app or a website can just be art too, which is really mind-blowing if you start to think about it. They're really not all that different. So why not take the skills that we use every day at our job and apply them to games? Game dev has a lot of benefits that you don't have to deal with when you're working your day-to-day. There's not really any linters that you have to deal with if someone told you to use. There's no pull requests. There's no code reviews. There's no rules. Unless you want. Sometimes rules are good. It's mostly about the user journey, you creating the game and the person interacting with the game. And the most important part of that is probably planning. And planning a game and planning an app or a website are very similar. So I found this as an example of user flow that we would think of. It just happens to be somebody getting a coffee. And they want a coffee, so they go to the kitchen. They go to the coffee machine, and then it branches off into some other options depending on what the coffee wants. There's an option where they give up if there's no milk. Let me full screen this again for you. Yeah, that's better. And then, eventually they get coffee, but sometimes some people are picky and they want a caramel mocha, yeah, whatever. And game storyboarding is really simple. This is mine. I know I have horrible handwriting, but it's just different states where you have a starting state, and then you check for different conditions and eventually get to the end. If I told you that gaming was all conditional statements, I wouldn't be lying. It's a lot of conditional statements. If you hate writing loops, well, if you love writing loops, then I have a great story for you. So, and after you know the story, game mechanics are another important part. And some things that comprise about game mechanics that we're going to talk about, this by no means touches on all of them. Of movement and mobility. So how do you control the player or character? How does it walk around? What rules are put on that player for the game? How do you score? Do you score? Is there even scoring in the game? Those are all things that you have to consider. And then once you have all that figured out, you have to think of game genres. And there's a lot. There's platformers, there's first-person shooters, there's adventure games, there's role-playing games, there's real-time strategy, there's MOBA, and I can never remember what the M means, beat-em-ups, shoot-em-ups, fighters, survival, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot. There's way more than this. I feel like people make up genres just whenever they make something new, which I kind of did. So what are we going to make today? We're going to make an action platformer, but it's not really a platformer. It's a catformer. And then what library are we going to use? Well, there's a lot of options for web-based games right now. There's Phaser, Pixie, P5, Construct, Crafty, Twine. Twine is really interesting in that you don't really need to code to use it, but you can. It's all text-based, and you just go through, and I've seen some really beautiful stories made with it. And the list goes on. There's a ton of browser-based ones that are using WebGL or Canvas elements, and the MDM has a list of a ton, and it's really long. You don't even have to use JavaScript, but you probably should if you're here. So let's talk about Phaser for a little bit, because that's the one that we're going to be using. It's a HTML5 and JavaScript platform that's a 2D game engine supporting web, Android, and iOS platforms. It makes it really easy for you to be able to make something super, super quick. The first time I used it, I made a game in 48 hours. It wasn't a very good game, but it was a game. All right, now we get to talk about code. So the Phaser setup is very similar to making a single-page web application. It's all inline styling in the page, which try and forget how much everyone tells you never to do that every day at work and to break the rules. So you have your regular web page set up, like HTML, head, body, and then in the body, inside a script tag, you do a window onload function, after linking to Phaser in the head, of course. And then to set up a new phaser game, there's always going to be three functions, not always, there's going to be three functions: a preload, which sets up your sprites and sprite sheets to be preloaded; create elements on the game canvas, which is create, so that's pretty much positioning and telling things where they need to go and setting up a sort of z-index, but it's not really z-indexing, it's just depth layering depending on when you include the images. And then update, which is constantly running at about 60 frames per second to check for certain conditions in your environment. And then you declare game as a variable outside of all of that, so you can access it globally inside that function. And you're defining it as 800 by 600 pixels and then calling those three functions below. So we're going to start with sprites. Sprites are a really important part of your game. They're going to be what most of the elements are made up of. Sprite is just an image. And then sprite sheets are a bunch of sprites inside one image. And they're what you need for animations. There are as many frames as you want of all equal size, controlling, if you want your player to go left or right or up or down. And then physics can be applied to them. And I don't mean physics in like a science-y way. There's actually a physics call inside Phaser that determines the actions that you're able to use. So this is an example of a sprite sheet. This is my cat. He's really fat, and his name's Rick. What it's doing is you are adding the left directions on the first half and the right directions on the right half. And so this is 6 frames for an animation that is going to be walk. So let's see how you define that. Inside of preload, you're going to call that game thing that we declared previously and load a sprite sheet that we're naming Rick. Go to the path of the file, and then it is 76 pixels wide by 44 pixels high. And there's 5 frames because it's JavaScript, and we start at 0. Which is really a pain in the ass, let's be honest. And then inside create, you're starting the game physics start system for Phaser Physics Arcade, which applies those arcade physics. You're setting the world bounds. It's going to start at, in the element 0, 0, x, y, and it's going to be 800 by 600 pixels. And then we're adding the player in, and it is starting it at 52x, so over 52, and we're taking the game world height and minusing 150 from it. So it happened a lot more in like old NES games where you would see like the character dropping in from the top, and that's what's happening. And then we're enabling physics on the player. And then after that, the player physics properties, which I added to the bottom, are just applying bounce and gravity to the characters so that it's not floating along, and so that if it jumps, it comes back down. So you could play with these a lot, especially if you're making like a space game or something like that. And then we're adding loop to the player animations just so we can loop through all those and make sure that they're working. And then inside the update function, we are calling loop, and we want it to go through all 5 of those. And then this is what that looks like. So you drop him in, and then he's just like going both ways because you haven't defined a left or right action yet. So let's do that. Of course my spacing is messed up, but whatever. It's a game, it doesn't matter. I'm putting this one here because I want you to remember it because I don't do it later on. Whenever you're adding a variable inside of update that's going to get changed sometimes or needs to be accessed from other places, you need to declare it with the game that's outside of create, preload, and upload. So just remember that top one. So inside create, we're going to define the left and right animations. It's frame 1 and 2, 0, 1 out of 5, 4 and 5 out of 5. And then inside, I promised you conditional statements. If the cursor left is down, that is inherent to Phaser. You're going to move the player with negative velocity. So he's going to go left. And then you want him to face left and set Rick looking to left, which is the check and update to find out which sprite you want. Same thing for right. And then if he's not looking left or right, he's obviously going to be standing still. And then lastly, let me scroll up. Sorry, that's really low. Player velocity, if the cursor is up and you are touching down, which is touching anything, then the player velocity is negative 350, which allows him to jump and come back down because we applied gravity to him previously. So then you're able to control him and jump around and have little cute animations. And it's really fun. So let's give him something to stand on. It's all really, honestly, Phaser is repeating the same thing over and over and over again. So let's preload the hardwood function, or the hardwood asset, which is going to be the platforms. And then we're going to define it as a group in case we need to reuse it later, in case you want some like Mario level, Contra, whatever, multiple platforms. Enabling body on the platforms. And then we're going to create the ground, which is taking that group and defining it at 0, and then 64 from the bottom. And it's impossible because if it wasn't, the cat would fall through, and that's like the worst thing that could possibly happen. And an update, I'm introducing something new, which is collide. So you're checking whenever player and platforms collide so that you are able to have them work as a platform. So now he's got something to stand on, and it's really great. Collision detection. Collision detection is probably one of the most important things I think of that I've run into with game dev. It can be used to set world boundaries for a player, let you know if the player is hit by enemies, landing on platforms, so jumping, interacting with useful objects like picking up an element in an arcade or in an adventure game or something like that. And it lets you define walls that you can't go through. So let's give him something. We're going to give him some treats. We're going to load that image. And then inside create, we're going to add the sprite at 254x, 394y, using treats, enabling arcade physics on the treats. And then we're introducing this thing that I haven't shown before, which is the body collide world bounds. We're setting it to true so that that is a collidable object. And we're only going to apply true to the top. So he can jump on top of something, but he can also walk through the sides. And it's immovable. Otherwise, if you walk into it, it would push it off the screen, and you wouldn't be able to interact with it. And then we're going to update that and set collision between player and the treats. And then, so now, Rick, Fat Rick, he's got the treats. And he can also walk behind the treats, so he's a happy cat. But we want to reward him for getting those treats. So in our global variable, we can set the score to 0, and then just define score text, which inside create, we're going to make score text, add some game text at 16 pixels top and left and like X, Y, and set it as score 0 to start with. And then you can style it a bit. Sometimes you can use web fonts, and it's really nice. So, but then you get to see it up in the corner. But right now, whoa, sorry. All right. Except right now, when he interacts with this, nothing happens. He doesn't get rewarded because we didn't define anything else. So you can define an overlap, which lets you know when any boundaries of the sprites are overlapping. And so that's what we did here. Game physics arcade overlap on player and the treats, and then call treat score. And then treat score is increasing the score by 50, and then changing the score text to reflect that new score, and then killing the treats. So let's reward Rick for getting some treats. So now we got 50 points, and he's excited. So that's pretty much it for the really basic interactions for a simple platformer. It's collision, it's scoring, it's movement. You can take those and apply different types of physics to different elements to have like bullet patterns or strange enemy patterns. Even though this example is a single state, you can use separate game states inside of Phaser. You can use require if you want to change in different files. So you can have a title screen and a main game. It's actually like, the documentation is really huge. There's probably things that you can do with Phaser that I'm not even telling you. So if there's something that you think you want to make, go check it out. And you can probably do pretty much everything with it. So These are only like a primer. It's very basic level, but in order to like talk to you about it, there's something that I've been working on for a really long time. Not really long time, 2 months. I have a short attention span, so that's a long time for me. And that's Rick's Big Day, which I'm going to show you right now to see what you can accomplish when you have a lot more time on your hands. Can I get audio off my computer? I have the jack plugged in. Okay, I'll just play it out loud so you can hear it. So this is Rick's Big Day. He's a sleepy cat, and he just likes to play with stuff and eat food. So basically, you have this perfect model. That is not a bong. That is a KitchenAid mixer. I swear, I told you I wasn't good at design. But I did all of the art. I did all of the code. And the reason I called this an adventure catformer is because I don't tell you what you can and can't interact with. So it's up to the player to decide what they can and can't play with. So he can play with cat grass, and then he can jump down here, and he can play with this roller track. He can scratch the couch, which he loves to do so much. He can play with the lamp, he can play with the toy. This is the layering that I was talking about, depending on the order that you add the sprites in. He can use the litter box. He has 9 lives that never go down because it's my game. Why would I do that to my cat? It's really just about like, my cat likes to play and have fun, and he's chill, and so I wanted him to have a big day in a game version of himself. And it was mostly about just like exploring what I could and couldn't do with Rick's Big Day, which it's not done yet. There's going to be a lot more for him to do. Thanks. So what now? What can you do if there's something that you want to play with? There's game jams. The one that I talked about earlier, there's one called Ludum Dare. It's a 48-hour game jam. Usually it starts Friday night, goes into Sunday. It's really fun. It's also really stressful. I recommend ordering a large pizza and like a 2-liter of soda and locking yourself in your apartment. There's TIG Source, which is the indie game source to find out what a lot of new developers are doing. There's itch.io, which is where a lot of people host their games, so you can see what like fun things that people have made. And if you're not sure where you really want to start, there's Sorting Hat, which was made by Zoe Quinn, that it's Twine powered, and it asks you questions to try and direct you to what might be like the right solution for you. So I want you to go out there and make something, whatever you want. You can do WebGL VR, which just sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. It's really fun, though. You can make stuff with voxels. Experiment with P5, 3JS. I've seen some games made with both of those, and they're really cool and exciting. Mostly forget about the constraints that you adhere to every day in your job, because there's something really freeing about being able to control your whole entire process and not have someone dictate to what you're doing. But most importantly, just like have fun in the whole entire process. Break the rules. Games are art, and I want people to go out there and make some art. Thanks.
You're a really great artist, and I think
Thanks.
that developing art with code, like games especially, is like a great way to express your creativity. Mm-hmm. Not just for yourself, but for like all of your peers. Like now, like everyone knows what like a bomb-ass artist you are. In 2008, I was like, I'm gonna learn JavaScript, and I don't know what I want to do. Maybe I want to do games, but I guess like browsers seemed like not a good space for that because they were kind of slow. And also when I was looking at like what frameworks I wanted to use to start out, there was like a page I went to that had like a list of 500 like game making frameworks in the browser, and I was like, nope. And then I like started doing pixel art instead. But it seems like a lot of that has changed.
Yeah, it's a lot different. When I was in my early 20s, it was mostly just like, you're gonna make some Flash and put it on Newgrounds or Congregate, and that's your option. And I was like, I hate ActionScript, that's not happening. Yeah, but now there's, like, people are even like using Lua, and there's going to be JavaScript in Unity, because right now Unity has just Unity script, but I think Brendan Eich is working on something, well, Century Chickens. So I think there's a lot of people that are finding out that games are more accessible to people as a whole, and it's not so hard anymore. So more people are going forth and building tools and making it so anybody can make a game, because they can. You don't even need to code to make a game. There's even MIT's Scratch that you can use, where you're just putting together puzzle pieces and making a game.
And I feel like those are also good ways to introduce people to like object-oriented programming and stuff like that. I think of like things like Alice, which came out of Stanford, which is like teaching storytelling and programming at the same time. And games are just a great way to tell a story. In this case, a really awesome story, the story of Fat Rick.
Yeah.
What is like on your wish list that you wish you can do in an in-browser game that can really only be done in like proprietary like console games?
It's actually like getting so advanced that there's not a lot that you can't do in the browser. Like, obviously you're not going to be able to run a lot of things in browser, or even if you have a PC, unless you have really good settings. But like, you can do VR in the browser. You can make stuff with WebSockets and have a bunch of people with Google Glass connecting to each other. And you can do 3D stuff. You can make a totally in-browser, like, World of Warcraft style game if you wanted. Like, it might be really low res and low poly, but there's a lot of options there. I wouldn't say that there's like constraints that I wish that I could have, that I could do more. I think that I wish that more people would appreciate non-shooter games as something important. And like, don't get me wrong, I've been playing Overwatch for like 2 to 3 hours every night for the past, since it came out. But I think that there's like, it's the game development community is so similar to like dev, as in what is or what isn't something. And I think that the more people that make fun experiments and just like play with code, the more other people are going to see them doing it and are going to want to do it themselves.
I think it's really cool to see as there are more creative people who are working with the web, getting into games, there's less of that insecurity projection that's like happening where people are saying that's not like real or whatever. Do you have any, my last question for you, do you have any shouts out to game developers working in the browser that you're really stoked about or know that we should look for?
Well, when you ask me in the browser, I'm like, I can't think of anything. Well, I can think of anything. A lot of the pixel art that I used, or all the pixel art in the game I did myself, but the fonts were designed by Anna Anthropy, who's an amazing, amazing developer and storyteller, and she makes really awesome games that challenge people's expectations. And I don't think that, she doesn't make games as much as she used to, but her website has a whole archive about her process, and like, she made a game about her 2 cats like in the woods, and like she made a really interesting game about being in a polyamorous queer relationship where you're trying to see how many people can fit sleeping in a bed. So it's like Tetris but in a bed type thing, and it's really interesting. Like, people make games about like their depression and anxiety and, you know, sex and things that you wouldn't think of anymore because the tools are more accessible, and I just wish that more people would do that.
Yeah, not just expressing your creativity, but also just like your literal life.
Putting emotion into something, because emotions are okay. So.
And unavoidable.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.